Normally, the letter you would receive, the first paragraph would write, "May a blessing be on you and your family." The second paragraph would write, "I'm sure you heard this before. I was convicted of murder, but I really didn't do it." Well, Anthony didn't write that. Anthony wrote a letter from his heart, describing about his family, his loved ones, and in detail what he wanted me to do for him.
Anthony wants Race to reinvestigate the cab driver's murder. Race writes Faison back with a request.
I wrote him a letter back. I want 4 documents, if you have them, about your case. The crime scene report, the autopsy report, the interview by detectives of the first officer, and the detective's notes of his observations on the crime scene.
Anthony sends Race the 4 documents he requested.
You have an individual killed inside of a taxi cab. He's in the driver's seat. All the doors are locked except the right rear passenger door. Why would anyone lock all the doors except the passenger door, the right rear passenger door? Then I noticed the gunshot wound was from the right rear of the victim. So everything is consistent with your thinking someone was in the cab in the right rear, shot into the right side of the head of the cab driver, and left.
But Race sees a glaring conflict between the crime reports and Carolyn Van Buren's statement.
I read the witness's account of what happened. The witness describes everything happening from the driver's side. For a cab driver to be shot on the right side of the head, from the driver's side, he'd have to be facing the rear window, sitting in the driver's seat only backwards. Well, that's not going to happen.
About a week later, Anthony gets a second letter from Race.
And I opened the letter, and it says, "Hi, this is Michael Race. Are you sitting down?" I get scared when people start talking like that. Sitting down? I mean, ain't too much to do in a cell.
Told him after I read those documents, analyzed all these reports, you did not commit this crime. It's cut and dry.
Anthony Faison has been in prison for 12 years for the 1987 murder of a cab driver, a murder he claims he didn't commit. In January 1999, Anthony receives a response from NYPD detective turned private investigator Michael Race. Race believes Anthony didn't kill the cab driver and is determined to find out who did.
He says, immediately after reading your letter, I went and hit the streets. And everything you wrote in your letter was true.
Race heads to the Albany Housing Project in Brooklyn and begins tracking down the eyewitness whose testimony put Anthony behind bars, Carolyn Van Buren.
She was the only prosecution witness. There's no evidence, there's no DNA, there's no blood, there were no statements, there's no other independent witnesses to corroborate Carolyn's story. I tracked her down to her mother's house. We met, identified myself.
To Race's amazement, Carolyn Van Buren recants her testimony. She then gives him a videotaped statement.
So you were never at the scene at Albany and St. Mark's?
Never.
You never saw Anthony Faison shoot anyone?
No, I did not.
She told me why she lied, how she lied, and what she was paid.
Carolyn Van Buren tells Race that she was addicted to crack in 1987, and one day a drugging buddy of hers hatched the scheme to implicate Anthony and Charles Shepard in the cabbie's murder. They'd split the $1,000 reward. Then Van Buren gives up her accomplice's name.
How did you learn the facts of the case to tell someone about this?
I got it from Nicky Roper.
Nicky promised Carolyn, hey, if you come forward and say that these 2 guys did it, I'll give you $500. $500 to a junkie back in 1987 was like me winning Mega Millions now.
Nicky Roper also wanted personal revenge against Anthony and Charles.
Anthony and Charles worked at a construction site. Nicky wanted a job to work at the same site. The only problem that Anthony and Charles had is if we hire you, you steal tools, we get fired. We're not going to hire you.
Race knows he needs all the help he can get and enlists veteran New York journalist Sarah Wallace in the hunt for Nicky Roper. Wallace hits pay dirt at a grocery store near the Albany houses.
The way that we got to Nicky was from his friends at the bodega. They got him on a cell phone. I then said, let me come up and talk to you. I wasn't sure he'd come out of his apartment. He did. He was very resistant at that point. And then he finally told me the truth. What is the truth?
That they didn't do it.
Nicky Roper said that everything that Carolyn Van Buren had told us was absolutely true, and that he knew that they didn't do it.
Michael Race gets Nicky Roper to sign an affidavit admitting that he coerced Carolyn Van Buren into fingering Faison and Shepard. But Race knows that Roper's affidavit is still only half the battle. Unless he proves who really killed the cab driver, Anthony might spend the rest of his life in jail.
This way a judge can say, okay, you two guys are out and the next one's in. Like, take a penny, have a penny. It makes it easier for the district attorney's office. It makes it easier for a judge.
In early 2000, Race gets a break. An Albany Houses resident named Cameo Straughter tells him her boyfriend confessed to shooting the cab driver.
She received some letters from him from prison because he was doing time for something else, and he acknowledged that yes, in fact, I did it. He was involved.
Yes, that he was involved. It wasn't the boys that got blamed for it.
Race gets an affidavit from Straughter and zeroes in on her boyfriend, Arlette Cheston. But when Race questions him in his home, Cheston's not admitting anything.
And then he started to sweat, freak out, start screaming for his mother. And the mother came down and she started screaming. And she asked me to leave.
It has been almost 2 years since he first heard the name Anthony Faison, and Race needs a tough trial lawyer to submit the new evidence to a judge. He turns to civil rights attorney and radio host Ron Kuby. Kuby focuses on a piece of evidence that, for some unknown reason, had never come to light at the trial.
It didn't make any sense. A series of fingerprint reports. Of course, they dusted the inside of the taxi for fingerprints. And they removed a number of usable prints, latent prints. That is, they could be identified.
Kuby starts drafting a motion, a request to the court to admit the newly discovered evidence.
It's their last chance. They're not getting another one, so let's put in everything and see where it goes. Hey, here's Arlette Cheston. Cameo Straughter said that Arlette Cheston committed this murder. And I included a request that the DA's office at least run the latent fingerprints of value against the database they have now. And maybe they would match these prints to someone who had a criminal record, and we could at least use that as the basis to reopen the investigation.
It works. The judge reopens the case and directs the district attorney to review the new evidence. 1 week later, Kuby gets a phone call from the DA's office.
He said to me, we ran the fingerprints. And he said, this only happens on television. I've only seen this happen in the movies. But Arlette Cheston's fingerprints were found in the back of the cab.
On May 14th, 2001, Anthony Faison is awakened in his cell.
They came and got me. I was given some court clothes, handcuffed, shackled, and put in a car.
Several hours later, the car pulls up in front of the Brooklyn Supreme Court. Anthony is stunned.
We show up at the hearing. The DA's office presents this to Judge Kreindler, who himself is shocked. Remember, he is the judge who sent these guys to prison.
Judge Kreindler was asking some very tough questions in court. Why should we dismiss the indictment? And there was a moment when I thought, oh my gosh, he's not going to release them. They're going to stay in prison. And then all of a sudden the district attorney said that they agreed to dismiss the indictment. And that's when Judge Kreindler said, you're free.
He apologized to both of them, and we all walked out into this beautiful, brilliant May day, and sunshine was everywhere, and family members were everywhere, and cameras were everywhere.
It's been a very hard fight and very long fight, and With the same breath, I have to say that we cannot forget those men who sit in prisons across America who suffers from an injustice.
After 14 years in prison, Anthony and his co-defendant Charles Shepard are free men. The real killer, Arlette Cheston, pleads guilty and is serving 15 years to life. 2 years after his release, Anthony is awarded $1.6 million by the state of New York for wrongful imprisonment.
I saw the whole process of him grow as a person, and I saw him get stronger and stronger with every year. I know he had a lot of power from within.
You can't give up hope. As long as you don't do that and you stay focused and you have that will, anything is possible.